there, spooky friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Scaryish podcast. I'm Robin Grace. This is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
That's a woo. And here are some topics we're gonna tell you.
I knew you were gonna rhyme it. I just knew it was gonna happen.
I don't even know.
I hate you so much. So yet another topic episode of Scaryish. This is the first ever Wednesday topic episode. So super exciting thing. And
it's
I
not
will
going to be a normal thing.
Absolutely not. This is the first time we've actually ever missed a Tuesday or a Friday for our typical releases. And that one is on me. I got a little second dose of my COVID vaccine, and it definitely put me on my ass a little bit. Was very, very sleepy and was unable to stay conscious for longer than like 2 hours at a time on Monday, which is our normal record day. So apologies to everyone for making you wait an extra 24 hours, but here it is. Very happy to be bringing it to you only 24 hours later, and I feel fine. I'm super happy about that, so it's pretty awesome. Robin, what are you going to be covering this week?
I'm going to be covering the Lazarus project. Like, this actual scientist that did this project is a thing. And what are you doing?
So I'm going to be covering the Philip experiment. It's kind of funny because as I was typing this one out, I kept wanting to write Philadelphia experiment. As I started, I'm like, no. This one's called Philip. So I'm pretty excited to cover it as well. But I think I'm going to be going first this week, so I don't have to wait much longer. So that's pretty awesome. So
all right.
I'll just go ahead and get started. This week, I actually wanted to follow up on a topic that I alluded to in a past episode. I think I brought this up on quarantine hauntings, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So covering hauntings is always entertaining and creepy, but I had heard about this specific instance/experiment for a long time. I've heard about this like way before we started the show, and I hadn't done any in-depth research on it yet. This is one of the things that I kept forgetting basically to put it on our topic doc. So I was worried that it would never get covered because anytime I did remember it, I kept forgetting to put it on the topic doc. But hey, it finally made it. So this is one that actually wound up overlapping with one of my previous topics, and that was the moment I realized I had to go ahead and put it down. And it's about time that I go ahead and finally cover it. This one's a mix of like science and a little bit of hoax, depending on your perspective, and a haunting, all really wrapped up in a weird way. So without further ado, I present to you the Philip experiment. So fans of horror or weird experiments or paranormal podcasts or other spooky things in general may have heard of this before, and this may sound slightly familiar to you if you've seen the movies The Apparition or The Quiet Ones. This experiment was the inspiration for those two movies in particular in a really, really big way.
Can you remind me what they are?
So I've not seen The Apparition, so I can't remind you of that one, but The Quiet Ones we did watch, where they're performing some sort of an experiment on a girl who claims to be possessed, and there was like some sort of fire associated with her, or the professor who's like a really creepy dude. And then in the end, you realize like the girl overlapped with the first fire that happened like 30 years ago when they're performing some weird ritual. You have absolutely watched it. You're the reason that I watched it. So.
I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
And the guy who's the professor is the guy who plays Moriarty in the Sherlock Holmes movies with Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, okay.
So that's The Quiet Ones. And I definitely know we've seen that one. I have not seen The Apparition. If you have, I'm not sure.
I probably have.
You probably have and you've already forgotten. This particular experiment took place in 1972 in Toronto, Ontario. That is part of Canada, for those of you unfamiliar. The experiment, in case there's anyone out there who doesn't know.
Well, there's a Toronto, California.
Is there?
Yeah.
Well, Toronto, Ontario, obviously is part of Canada.
Yeah.
So anyways, the experiment was the brainchild of Dr. Alan Robert George Owen, a man with 4 first names, who went by A.R. George Owen for short. And he was referenced as George throughout the entirety of this experiment and all the stuff I've read about it, who was a mathematical geneticist and a parapsychologist. A Dr. Joel Witten was a psychologist who would oversee the experiment and basically evaluate the results that would come in from it. George was pretty accomplished. He received his master's and PhD from Cambridge University. He was also born in 1919, and everything that I looked up states that apparently he is still alive, so that makes him 102 years old today. And he was around 50, 60 something, I think. I'm not mathing very well because it's 2 a.m., but he was later on there in years when he ran this experiment, so he definitely had a lot of experience under his belt. The concept of the experiment was as follows. You create a fictional character complete with backstory and details. Sort of like when you have a writing assignment where you do character creation or development. I know I had those in school. I mean, my major was creative writing, so that's probably why. I don't know if a lot of other folks had that. in school, whether it's university or high school levels, where you just sort of develop details around a fictional character. Once the backstory had been developed, the participants would all be given access to this character's backstory, knowing full and well that it was a fictional character. And once all the participants were familiar with this background, they would proceed to the next phase of the story. Before I get to that part of the experiment, though, let's talk about the character that was created. His name was Philip Aylesford, hence the name, the Philip Experiment. He would be referred to as Philip during the experiment. They wouldn't call him Mr. Aylesford or any of that. Philip was born in 1624 in England.
I mean, it sounds like a made-up name.
I mean, it does, but all names are made up if you think about it.
That's very true.
He had enlisted in the military at a very young age and had actually been knighted by the time he was 16 years old. Guess if you're making up a backstory, might as well go big, you know?
Okay, I was...
Among his military you already forgot that he's not real. Yeah. Among his military exploits, he was a participant in the English Civil War, which, as we all know, took place from 1642 to 1951, but that would be 1651. It didn't last that long. During this time, he performed duties as a spy and became personal friends with Charles II, who was a real person. Philip was married to a woman named Dorothea, whom he did not like. He fell in love with a Romani girl later in his life. She wound up being accused of witchcraft and was burned at the stake. The loss of his beloved was more than he could bear, and he took his own life in 1654 at the tender age of 30. So pretty super deep backstory, right? Like really heavy on the plot.
I mean, you even got me there for a second.
Yeah. Fills you with lots of questions. You want to know more already. You want to know more about this character. A really good overlap with actual individuals and actual events from history to root the character as well. So they really did their research on how to write a fictional character. Philip almost feels real, right? Just already. It's pretty creepy if you think about it. Anyways, his backstory was deliberately written with inaccuracies in it, so it's not a 100% airtight alibi. So don't go thinking you're going to be able to Randall Stevens away using it. Side note, that was a Shawshank reference.
I was going to say, what's Randall Stevens?
There's a Shawshank reference to, it's another fabricated individual from that movie. 10 cool points if you picked up on that one. Actually, I'll go with 100 because I don't know how many folks are going to. So we have our character. It's Philip. What's the next part of the experiment? Of course, hold a seance and attempt to communicate with Philip, which just seems like a really weird thing for someone to sit around and contemplate. Like, Robin always has these things. She says, like, who do you think's the first person that ate an egg? Who saw an egg come out of a chicken's ass and was like, I'm going to eat that?
That's the second time he's brought that up this week, okay?
It's a really good example of the sort of questions Robin asks aloud randomly. But honestly, who comes up with an idea like this? Like, you know what we should do? We should hold a seance for someone we just made up. And that's exactly what this experiment was.
Did people know that he was made up?
Yeah, everyone that was involved had to research his backstory, but they 100% knew that he was fictional. My first thought would be like, wait, but he's fake. Why would we bother with this? Well, yeah, he's fake, but wouldn't it make it even weirder if there was some sort of a response if you were having a seance for a character that you knew was made up? So they gave it a shot. The folks chosen to participate were Iris Owen, which is the wife of George Owen, the guy who came up with the whole thing. Margaret Sparrow, who is a former chairperson at Mensa in Canada.
Wow.
Right?
So she's smart.
Yeah, they got some big brains on this panel. An industrial designer named Andy. Andy's wife, Lorne. A heating engineer named Al Peacock. I found some follow-up research from his son who talked about the experiments that he was around when they were performing and how scary they were.
Why doesn't Andy have a last name?
He had a last name. I just didn't include it. I don't know why. I just didn't write it down. I didn't write down most of their last names, in fact, except for the main people. But
all right.
An accountant named Bernice, a bookkeeper named Dorothy, and a sociology student named Sydney.
This sounds like something out of like The Haunting, the movie. They just have all these people come in, for the science experiment.
I think they picked people that they knew and people from a broad spectrum of different professions that were still interested in what the experiment would be. So a lot of sites really make it sound, if you go on the internet and you research this, like they got a response right away when they began conducting the experiment, but that's actually not accurate. I watched several interviews with some of the main people that were part of this, including Iris Owen, who was the wife of George, is the wife of George. And she had some very interesting things to say about how the experiments unfolded. They actually conducted this experiment over the course of several months. I think a lot of sites really try and make it sound like they thought up this idea, they wrote the backstory, they sat down, they did it, and they got results, and that was it. But that's not exactly how this happened. Actually, they wound up doing this a whole bunch of times. And over the course of the first month or so, they did not get any sort of response. And they made some changes to the way the experiment was conducted. And while it's not 100% clear what the original orientation of the experiment was, they decided to add some traditional seance methodology to the experiment. The first big one...
Ouija board?
No. The first big one was you got to dim the lights.
Oh, okay.
You got to get the
so
mood
really
lighting
with
right.
Step one.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Step one, turn down the lights a bit, get the mood lighting going. The second thing was they incorporated what is known as table turning. They actually didn't wind up getting a Ouija board out for this thing.
Table turning.
Table turning was actually big in the 1800s, but was still practiced in the 1900s as well. Table turning is where all participants sit around a table. In this case, the one that they used was a square table that looked like a card table, and they placed their fingers on the edge of the table. In some cases, they placed their whole hands, but it's mainly just a finger on the top of the edge of the table. It was originally used to wait for the table to twist. That's why it's called table turning. And in a lot of cases, tilt. Like one end of the table would stand up, and what would happen is the people that were sitting at the table would speak aloud the alphabet, and the table would react to the appropriate letter. It's almost like a rudimentary manual Ouija board.
Okay.
So I think it's funny because how many times do you have to go through the alphabet?
I was going to say.
That's probably where the fucking song came from. Everyone was like, A, B, C. They just got so bored, they turned it into a beat. So you may hear that and think, no wonder the Ouija board was invented. But again, a spirit board with letters on it was invented in China in the 12th century. The first time I covered Ouija boards, I mentioned that, mentioning it again. FYI, I don't know if I mentioned this the first time when I said it way back when, but its use was forbidden after like several months by the Qing dynasty.
The front door.
Yeah, because it was used for necromancy, and they were getting these really scary results, and they were communing with the dead. So they're like, you can't use it. If you use it, like, you're going to be killed. Like, we will kill you. So they just outlawed it immediately after it was invented, which I think should probably be talked about more. Anyways,
we
they
still
decided,
use it as a kid's game.
right? Not a fucking kid's game. Anyways, they included table turning in the experiment. So they have this card table. All the members sit around with their fingers on the edge, and they would call out to Philip and ask questions. And very soon after they started doing this, they began to get little shifts in the table. It felt like the table was being scooched.
I mean, I
for lack of a
scooch
better
the
term.
table with my leg all the time.
Lots of people do. And at first, they all did what anyone who has ever fucked around with a Ouija board with their friends does. Immediately accuse someone of doing it. Like, you moved it, right? Like, don't lie to me, you moved it.
Okay, see, but with table tilting and you know, you could just bump the table.
Yeah, absolutely you could.
It just doesn't seem reliable.
And despite the fact that this is a, like, very high level of prestige with a group of people that's in it, experiment being run, that's where their head went right away as like, are you screwing with this? Someone's got to be screwing with it right now. So at first, that just seemed like the logical explanation, but it was determined that the sort of skeptical energy generated by, like, people that were practical or scientists, which the vast majority of these folks were, or just skeptical people in general, would not be conducive to an experiment where you're trying to elicit a reaction from essentially a paranormal entity that doesn't exist. So they would set a rule instead where any sort of phenomenon or paranormal activity would be responded to with positivity. So rather than people being like, this gotta be bullshit, or accusing each other, you have to act positive. Like, be excited about it. Don't be, one, afraid, or two, skeptical. Like, remove those energies from the experiment.
So they want you to be like, oh my god, it's a demon.
Yes, and if you want to watch the experiments, I'll talk about it in a little bit, but it's almost kind
you can
of...
watch the
oh yeah, it's totally
thing?
recorded.
What?
It's kind of fucking annoying. I won't lie, it's just not the mood that I want.
Is it the dialogue that's annoying, or...?
It's the overall, like, positive, like, overjoyed energy, and people criticize it on YouTube. They're like, this is clearly fake, and it's like, you clearly didn't do your research. They were forced to do this because at first they're all just like, this is hogwash. So anyways, they said, like, basically they're like, yes, and the energy.
Okay.
Like, feed into it, see what happens. It'll be conducive to the experiment that way. And sure enough, as they continued on with the experiments, they began to not only have the frequency of these table shifts increase, a lot more activity would begin to kick up as well. One notable phenomenon noticed was the presence of knocking. They started hearing knocking in response to some of their questions. The team would hear knocks randomly, and they realized they would hear them in ones and twos, so they asked aloud if they could use a system of 1 knock for yes, 2 knocks for no.
And this is all talking to Philip.
Yes. The ghost that doesn't exist. So
it's obviously a demon.
With this in place, they began to ask Philip a variety of questions. Things like if he was in love with his wife, because in the backstory they wrote for him, he was not in love with his wife. If he was in love with his mistress, which is dumb because her death triggered his suicide, so it's obvious. Where he stayed when they were together, basically an interview on the backstory to see if it all checked out. And we'll get to some of those questions and some of those responses in a bit. When the knocking became the primary form of communication between the participants and Philip, all living humans were frisked before each session to ensure they were not bringing in any foreign objects or other sources that would allow for these noises to be produced. So basically at this point, they're trying to maintain positive energy once the experiment begins. But before that, all bets are off. You better not be fucking with us. We're going to check everything to make sure you people are telling the truth.
Okay.
So they also increased the amount of observation that was being done on the experiments, mainly with cameras, so that any artificial results would be sussed out. Basically, more people were brought in to watch, and there were more cameras recording the incidents, or the experiments, I should say, to make sure someone's not, holding their hand underneath the table and knocking.
Yeah.
Which is another reason why you put your hands, all your fingers on the table.
What about your knees?
I mean, you're supposed to be sitting back. And then in the experiment videos that you can see, some of them are sitting back, some of them are sitting underneath. But the card table is as it is because you can basically see what's going on underneath it.
I think it'd be cuter if everyone was like laying on their stomachs and just your hands were reaching out towards the table. And it's
why didn't they include the cute factor in the Philip experiment?
It's
oh
just,
my god!
That way, no one's knocking on the table with their knees. I
mean, they're literally watching their every movement. Like at some point, someone like taps their fingers in one of the videos, like just out of like boredom. Like they're just sitting there,
and it's someone like, "What the
they
fuck?"
smack their hand, like psh, don't fucking do that. But the knocks are completely different than tapping a finger.
Okay.
It's like if you were to take your knuckles and rap on a table.
All right.
So, okay. That is happening now. So nothing was found. They never caught anyone fucking around with the results of this, okay? The activity increased as the experiment continued and was replicated by the same individuals on different nights. The table would slide and knocks could be heard.
Okay.
The participants began to ask Philip to manipulate the lights and they would flicker. Philip wasn't always a willing or happy participant, though. The table began to slide out of the hands of participants and keep moving. And at this point, they determined that they were actually producing actual paranormal results because they could see the table move without anyone physically touching it. There's also reports in the experiment that the table would move on its own before the experiment began.
Magnets in the ground.
Sure, magnets. And with no one around. And apparently the most disturbing part of it was at one point, after a session, before they went back in for another one, the table began to slide and then picked up speed moving towards an open door before slamming into the frame because the table was too wide, as if the table itself was trying to leave the room.
I was going to say, the ghost wants to escape. They want to get out of there.
Which is just terrifying, man. Some control measures were taken to evaluate the results. Each participant was asked to knock on the table in a variety of manners and strengths in order for them to record it and compare it to all the knocks.
I was going to say, so you can
that
rule
Philip
out.
Did.
Okay.
Exactly. None at all seemed to match what it sounded like audibly or had the same wave signature. Like if you're recording something, you can see a sound wave.
Right.
And the reverberations were completely different and they didn't understand why. Once they became more comfortable with the experiment, they began to ask Philip questions directly about things that he was uncomfortable answering. Specifically Dorothea, his wife. He was asked, did Dorothea go to court with you? And Philip's answer was a series of knocks, not one or two, but a series of random knocks that were followed by scratching. And this happened very infrequently, but in most cases, if this happened or Philip behaved in a way that was not normal, it meant that he really did not want to be asked about this.
Okay.
So they avoided the topic of Dorothea in general. Although at one point, for science, they decided they would not back off that line of questioning just to see what would happen.
Did he flip the table?
So, no, he didn't. Actually, there's multiple instances during the communications where the table starts tilting. Like, randomly, like, one of the legs goes up, and you can see no one's lifting the fucking thing. It's really weird. And then the table would sometimes flip, and there's still knocking that can be heard. Like, they'd put their hands on it underneath, and you can still hear knocking. So no one's putting their hand underneath the table to knock on it. Like, they just disproved that because the table would randomly turn and twist and flip upside down sometimes, and the table would still get knocks coming from it. And you can see that no one's knocking on the top and there's nothing underneath. In fact, there's a really famous video about how this happened, and it was caught on camera. So, okay. They're asking him about Dorothea because they decide they're going to just power through this line of questioning, and they persist with it, and they basically tell him, like, come on, buddy, we're all bros here, and he decides he's going to answer them. So, this is where things got, in my opinion, the creepiest. So when asked if he was forced to marry Dorothea, he replied, yes. He was then asked, did her parents force this marriage upon you? Did they need the financial help your money could give? He again replied yes. They then asked, was she a cruel person? And he replied yes yet again. This particular line of questioning would produce a lot of details about Dorothea, but then about Margot, which is who his mistress was. In the backstory, Margot had lived in the gatehouse, and that's just sort of where she stayed while they had their affair. When inquiring with Philip if Margot had lived in the gatehouse, he replied no. They repeated the question. He again replied no. They then asked aloud if the gatehouse was called something different back then, as if the parlance of the time of the fictional character they're trying to talk to hadn't matched the script, and that might be why they're getting a different result when asking did they live in the gatehouse, because gatehouse might not have been the word for it when Philip was supposedly alive, you know? And then someone thought to ask out loud, perhaps she lived in the main house, to which Philip replied yes.
So she lived with them in their main house.
He went on to confirm that Margot lived in his quarters with him.
Wow.
So Philip, basically, during this line of questioning, which agitated him, went off script. All of a sudden, all these details about Philip's backstory that they're asking about just started spinning off from a different version. Like, it wasn't what was written about what had happened with Philip when they made him up.
He's creating his own story.
He's creating his own story now. Or he's lying, or it's a demon, or it's bullshit. One of those. The phenomenon was actually presented to multiple scientific journals, but they wound up getting a television program. I could not identify which one because the video is very, very old, where they were asked to recreate the phenomena, and it was caught on tape. At some point, the table is flipped upside down. Now, because of the editing, you can't actually see the table flip. I've seen a bit and a piece here and there of the experiment footage, which has been really, really hard to locate. But the television footage, they wind up with the table upside down, and their hands are on it, and they're asking Philip if he wants a beer so they can produce a yes for those who are watching, because Philip say his backstory, and one of the things he confirmed during the experiment is he does like beer. I mean, who doesn't? So they really try and play up the happy aspect of it. They're all like acting like, you know, your best bro just showed up at a party. They ask him if he wants a beer. Then they start singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall, which is just super fucking annoying. It's way too chipper for me.
It's too many to go through to
And
sing
then-
that 99 times.
I mean, they do it 2 times, and then they ask again, and they get a knock. And the television host, like, is trying to figure out what the hell is happening, where the knock's coming from, because the table's upside down, the top is flat on the ground, so there's no way that anyone can have their hands underneath, and they're just kneeling next to it with their fingers on it, and then he puts his fingers on it too, just to see what happens.
Yeah.
They bring the microphone down directly up to the table, and they keep begging Philip to knock harder, because they don't think it's audible, and you can't hear the knocks. You hear all the fucking knocks the entire time.
Really?
So if I was Philip, I'd be like, I'm not going to knock anymore. Like, stop fucking asking me. But they keep asking him. You can actually see the video of this. It's around 7 minutes long on YouTube. But be careful, because as I was going through to try and find more of the actual experimentation videos, there are a lot of recreations, especially from the 70s and the 80s when this gained popularity. And they're really cheesy and they're really awful. I'll be posting several images of the actual participants as far as I can tell, because I did find pictures of A.R. George and his wife. And you can try and find the right video. Like I said, it's around 7.5 minutes long, close to 8 minutes. It starts out with a little bit of explanation of it. Then it has an interview with George's wife where she talks about how the entire thing started. And then they actually go to the experiment that they ran on television. And it's pretty fascinating to watch because it could all be fake. The guy could be in on it, but it genuinely seems like you're getting this knocking noise and you just don't know where the hell it's coming from.
Yeah.
So after the experiment was concluded to be done, you basically go through and you decide to take whatever sort of results you can find. And Dr. Joel Witten, who I mentioned at the beginning of this, was the psychologist who was overseeing the experiment. And he made some conclusions of his own. And he decided that the effects that were observed were produced in one of 3 possible ways. It could be some type of concentrated energy is his number 1. Number 2 is that it was generated by the participants as an elaborate defense mechanism against some deep-seated unconscious conflict. Like someone there somehow generated this in their subconscious, whether it was like through a leg twitch, where it was like a physical response that they didn't realize they were doing, or some sort of like actual telekinetic knock that they were producing.
Okay.
He's not specific about, But that sounds really weird. It's often misquoted. It's also misquoted in Wikipedia as him basically stating that they all just made it up with subconscious actions. That's not what he says. It's actually at the end of that 7-minute video I'm referring you to. So feel free to check that out. And then the third thing he mentions is that the group's dynamic and intuition, because they're so plugged in together, because they had done this thing so many times, might have been some weird way where they were producing this together. Again, not getting too specific, but it's very generalized information, whether he's talking about it being like telekinetic or just they all were in on this together without like consciously knowing they were. So what do I think? Well, I think it's important to know a bit of postscript on Dr. Joel Witten because it is important. His explanation of the experiments sound reasonable, albeit slightly dismissive or vague. And I'm used to experiments with lack of evidence or lack of enough evidence to point towards a specific finding being determined or called inconclusive. That's the word I've always heard. Which the experiment was called by a lot of other people who reviewed the findings that were not Dr. Joel Witten. I will say, Dr. Joel Witten had his medical license suspended for 30 days.
Oh my, what?
Over the course of June 22nd, 2007 through July 21st, 2007, due to a variety of issues in multiple trials.
Wow.
So this person who was this expert witness in the 70s later in life, wound up being pulled into court for different things that he was considered an expert witness on. And those became issues. Those issues were 6 separate instances of incorrect evidence. And also, he lied about his credentials so that he would actually qualify as an expert witness in multiple trials. So not just like handling evidence incorrectly or forming incorrect observations based off the evidence presented or presenting fake evidence. He also lied about his qualifications. It happened in 1997 and again in 1998. It took almost a decade after this was found for anything to be done about it and for him to be held accountable. And when he was held accountable, it was a 30-day suspension, and that was it. So I thought it was kind of shocking that this happened across multiple trials, and that's like the slap on the wrist he basically got. But it's good to know when reviewing his findings on this case that later on in life, his findings were deemed highly questionable and cost him 30 days of being able to practice.
Yeah.
So another thing I could not help but think of was a story we received from a listener who had lost her mother. I don't know if you remember this when we got it on Storytime, but we got this story in about this listener who had had these deep talks with her mother about how if either of them died, they would try and contact the other one after death.
Yeah.
And that she was...
I do remember that
I think
one.
in her old room or her daughter's room or something along those lines, and there were like toys on the ground, and she was just really, really vulnerable and really upset. And the toys started making noise and moving on their own. And she just had this overwhelming sense that that is not my mother. And it just hit her like a ton of bricks. And she prayed and it went away and the activity stopped. And I could not help but think of that when I was reading it. And you mentioned it right away. That's where your head went to right away as well. Is like, it's got to be a demon. Like, we've heard these countless stories and we've done these topics and we've watched these movies that the energy you put out, is what feeds paranormal activity to happen. And so I feel like this experiment, a lot of folks think that it shows that people can actually conjure an entity out of nothingness with combined consciousness and apparently a killer fucking backstory. But I couldn't help but think that the fabricated identity was put out there with energy and that an actual entity just sort of latched onto it because of the energy that was put out. Like, oh, I'll be happy to pretend to be that thing for you. Just like in so many other cases that we've seen, whether it's through the show or media or whatever. And I think that's something that's kind of ignored when it comes to like the scientific evaluation of this, is that's something that we see very commonly when it comes to paranormal activity and things like that.
Yeah.
And instead of thinking that they made a person that turned into a ghost, they made an identity that an imposter slid right in and started answering questions. And they're like, oh my God, we're getting results. This is amazing.
Well, it's like that Annabelle movie.
Yeah.
Annabelle
Creation.
Is it Creation? Okay.
It's a little bit different. They basically pray to whatever's listening to bring their daughter back.
Yes.
Like anything that can hear them.
Yeah.
Which is dumb. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. But it's just what it reminds me of, because there was this being, their daughter, that they wanted to come back. And so this thing is like, I'll do it. That's fine. If you are looking for someone out there, I'll do it.
Kind of evil, a little bit of a demon, but I'll be your daughter for as long as it
Which I feel like that's
me.
what Philip is.
Well, Philip never existed. That's the craziest thing about it. It's not like they're impersonating something that was ever around. And that's what I think is the creepiest part about when it starts going off script. Like, it's almost like it's imposing a will of its own.
Yeah.
Like, no, she didn't live in the gatehouse. She lived with me. Fuck you. Like, that's creepy as shit to me. Or the last thing is that it could all be bullshit. It could be these very intelligent and very highly respected people, except for one, decided randomly that they're just going to come up with a complete fabrication of an experiment just to see what people would think. But we don't really know what it is. I will say that a lot of folks have tried to replicate this experiment and most have failed. Some of them have succeeded, and there's a couple other ones out there that are kind of creepy with less information on them. I just don't know. You know, I know a lot of folks try to do it, and I will say that if we get to 200 patrons, Robin and I and 8 randomly selected spooky friends will replicate this experiment. Not really,
What?
just joking.
No, we're
not
not
ever.
really gonna do that.
Don't you dare ever think about it.
Yeah,
we're not fucking
no,
doing that.
we're not doing it.
I thought Robin would have a bigger reaction to it, but she was just like, no, I'm not going to do that.
No.
So anyways, I thought this one was super interesting and very, very creepy because it just seems odd that they would try and actually basically will a being into existence for an experiment. And then when they got results, they were just like, oh, looks like it might be working. Let's show everyone the knocking. But yeah, it's a pretty creepy one. And that, my spooky friends, is the Philip experiment.
Cool. Thanks.
No problem.
All right. Well, before we get into the next portion, hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. We're going to go into our commercial break here. Welcome to my half of the episode. I'm going to be piggybacking off of Adam today because his topic just seemed like a good idea when he was like, oh, it's the Philip experiment. I was like, experiment, you say? I guess I want to do that too. And I love creepy, sciencey things. I think a lot of you folks do too. I know there have been comments on one of our recent episodes where people are like, more aliens.
Oh yeah, I totally saw that one.
But yeah, I love experiments and things like that. Educational sometimes, creepy sometimes. One of the things I came across while researching for this was like how the first cardio catheterization ever happened, and it was like someone was like, let's just stab this heart and hope nothing, you know, like weird experiments like that. And it is
was it on a living person or was it on like a cadaver heart?
I think it was a living person.
That's fucked up.
It's all really interesting. There's doctors out there that'll be like, no, this is what actually happened.
I bet you Sawbones has gone over that.
Who's
Sawbones is Justin McElroy and his wife, Dr. Sydney McElroy show where they like do weird medical history.
Oh, wait, she's a doctor? His wife's a doctor?
She's a doctor.
What?
Yeah.
Wow, I'm thoroughly impressed. That's cool. Wow. How did he get her?
Wow.
That's a Keith Haversberger thing.
It's crossing over with a bunch of different fandoms now.
All right. But I think experiments, things like that, I think it's all really interesting. So I'm going to cover a man, a scientist, who did some pretty interesting and horrifying experiments. So, Robert E. Cornish was an American biologist and writer, born December 21st, 1903. So he was born quite a long time ago in San Francisco, California. So in our local backwoods. I wanted to make a joke and be like, what's funny? It's Toronto, California. It's not. Toronto, California is like in the San Bernardino Mountains or something like that. It's not that far away.
Right on. I like that you think San Francisco is our local backwoods when it's 8.5 hours away.
Yeah, I mean,
that would be like if we were in where I grew up and we're like referencing someplace in Tennessee or northern Georgia.
No, I'm just saying because I'm saying that as in like it's in U.S. Normally we go, Europe. You went to Canada. I've gone to Australia. We've gone all over the world. But today I'm going to stick to America here. Okay. So, he apparently was a child prodigy. He graduated high school at 15 years old. He went to the University of California, Berkeley, also known as UC Berkeley, which is funny because you brought up UC Berkeley just today, right?
Yep. In the USA, it's the one school with a better engineering department overall than Purdue University, which is my alma mater, which came in second.
So this guy went to UC Berkeley, graduated at the age of 18 with honors, no less, which is friggin' what? How do you even? And then he got his doctorate in medicine by the time he was 22.
So he was an MD.
Yeah. Well, PhD. I don't know if he's an MD or PhD. He had a doctorate in medicine. I mean,
when I hear doctorate in medicine, I think medical doctor.
Yeah, that's true. It could be biology.
He could also hold a PhD as well. So
yeah, I don't know. Who knows? It doesn't say what he is. It doesn't say like Robert E. The internet doesn't say Robert E. Cornish, MD. You know what I mean? Anyway, I think it's impressive. I'm 31. I don't even have bachelor's. I have an associate's though, so that's good.
It sounded like you said bachelor's.
No, I got a vagilar's, that's for sure. No, but I just think it's really impressive to be so young and have accomplished so much.
Let's see how that works out for him.
So I guess you could call him Dr. Dr. Cordish if you want to, because he did get doctorate, right? But he was handsome and eccentric, apparently. From the pictures that I saw, he's all right. I wouldn't say handsome,
wow.
But whatever. To each their own. He worked on a whole bunch of different projects. One of the projects he worked on was like designing these special lenses so that you could read a newspaper underwater. I don't know. But I was just like, there's like swimming goggles. You could read with those, right? Can you read underwater with swimming goggles on? You
develop socks so you can peel bananas with your feet. That just sounds like the most worthless invention ever.
I don't know, man. But, so it's a weird project to work on. He worked in the Department of Experimental Biology at a university, something I didn't even know existed, but it probably led him into what we'll be talking about next. So, in 1932, before he was even 30 years old, he started getting interested in some freaky stuff. I don't know if it's freaky, maybe it's just a normal thing people think about, but it was like Dr. Frankenstein type stuff. He wanted to bring people back from the dead.
So no one sat him down and told him that sometimes dead's better.
Oh my dude.
Did you not have it in your script anywhere?
No, I don't have that in my script anywhere.
I told her, like, when she told me, like, kind of what she was covering, I'm like, all right, I got a joke ready to go.
Oh my god, I didn't even think about that whole time.
You're welcome.
It's because I take the topic seriously. Not really, but,
Not really, not at all.
But, no, dang it, I missed out on that joke. Okay, anyway. Around 1933, he develops this method for reanimation. Just in his head, he's like, this is what we're gonna do. This is how it's gonna work. It involved a seesaw or like a teeter board that rocked the body back and forth to kind of get the blood flowing in the body.
And
so
that's where that lyric came from. Everybody rock your body.
Oh, stop it. That's a Justin Timberlake song, right?
I don't know. It's one of them.
Rock your body.
It's either NSYNC or Backstreet Boys. I don't remember. Someone out there is a huge fan of whichever band it is.
It's a Justin Timberlake song.
Well, then it's NSYNC.
It's not NSYNC. It's just Justin Timberlake solo. Like
Rock Your Body is Justin. There's no fucking way.
It is. It's like on that same album as the song he wrote about Britney Spears. Cry Me a River. That song?
I don't believe that. All right, I'm looking this up. You can keep going. I'm not editing this out of the episode. One of us will rise. One of us will fall.
Oh, God. Oh, anyway. All right. So it required this seesaw teeter board type thing. You rock it back and forth. The blood starts flowing in the body, supposedly, of the deceased person. And then you inject this person with a cocktail of adrenaline and anticoagulants into their circulatory system. So the blood, shaking them back and forth, kind of pumps it, gets all that stuff flowing through there. He attempted this on...
So it rocks your body, right?
Fuck! Stop!
Yeah, it was Backstreet Boys.
Is it Backstreet Boys? Oh, damn it! I believed so much. I believe in Justin Timberlake way too much. Man, It's good. I love him. I think
I'm
he's
pretty
really
sure
talented.
Everybody Rock Your Body is followed by Backstreet's Back, all right.
Oh,
which
right.
NSYNC would not say, and
gotta...
Justin Timberlake would not say.
You're totally right about that. Oh, no.
I already said one will rise, one will fall. You got conged, bitch. What's up?
JT, hit me up. All right.
He's not gonna hit you up now.
I know, he's gonna be like, oh, I'm disappointed. You don't know my musical career. That's all right. You don't know my career. It's a fucking mess. All right. So he attempted his experiment on a number of different dead bodies. So they included victims of heart attacks, drownings, even electrocutions. He had, obviously, no success with bringing them back to life.
You don't say.
So now, if you're a dog lover, you may want to take a skipperoo, like 10, 15 minutes, something like that.
What the fuck? That long? I'm a dog lover.
I don't know, because it's not pretty what he does. It's not really, like, graphic, but it's sad what he does to dogs. All right. So he moves on, thinking that these bodies that he's been experimenting on have been dead too long. So because they've been dead too long, he can't bring them back.
He really sounds like Dr. Frankenstein.
So he wants to try this on dogs. So May 22nd, 1934, he gets 5 dogs, 5 fox terriers.
God.
So he names these dogs Lazarus 1 through 5. If you folks didn't know, the tale of Lazarus is actually one from the Bible. And I'm not saying anything about what I believe or not. I'm just telling you the story of Lazarus from the Bible. And just a little, summary. I'm not reading the whole thing. It's way too long. And there's a lot of dialogue, and I don't give a fuck about the dialogue. So.
I'm pretty sure I heard this in church before. That's exactly how the priest described it. I don't give a fuck about the dialogue. It's just a summary. Anyways, here's Wonderwall.
So Lazarus is a friend to Jesus. He has 2 sisters, Mary and Martha. And one day, Lazarus gets sick. He falls ill. And so his sisters send a messenger to Jesus telling him like, dude, he's sick. You gotta come out here. Something's up. But Jesus decides he's not gonna leave for another 2 days. So wherever he is in the world, he's just hanging out there for another 2 days. By the time he arrives to where they are, Lazarus has been dead and in his tomb for 4 days. So Jesus, of course, goes on to be like, I got the power in me. Tells them to take the stone off the tomb. He goes inside and brings Lazarus back from the dead. And so that is why this guy names his dogs Lazarus 1 through 5.
And I'm not saying about anything I believe, but it is also why Ra's al Ghul uses the Lazarus pit to come back from the dead. It is named after not this guy's experiments, but Lazarus from the Bible. I get it now. Okay.
There's a reason why the Lazarus movie. Have you seen that movie?
Yep.
Yeah, that's why it's called that.
I mean, I'm kidding. I obviously fucking knew this, so.
All right, so.
It's not like it's a Backstreet Boys NSYNC trivia.
Fuck you! I get it, okay? I was wrong, but I believed that Justin was that cool, okay?
That he would own all the Backstreet Boys good IPs too.
He can rock my body.
I get it. Stop giving shout-outs for JT.
All right, anyway. So Cornish is kind of insinuating, in a way, that he has the power to play God. He's naming his dogs Lazarus. Jesus brought Lazarus back from the dead.
Yeah.
He's just playing God at this point. It's
crossing
really
some fucking lines.
Yeah, it's ballsy to be doing that. It's just a little bit too much for me for him to be like, that's what I'm going to do, What he would do, now you guys can just skip forward if you want. All right. What he would do is medically suffocate these dogs with nitrogen gas.
Oh my God.
And
what a monster.
Yeah. And then waiting no more than 5 minutes after their heart stopped, he would resuscitate them. So he would use the teetering board thing, the seesaw thing, and then he would rock the dogs back and forth, maintaining their blood circulation. The dogs would then be injected with a mix of saline, oxygen, adrenaline, more blood, of course, and anticoagulants. Oxygen would then be blown into their mouths using a rubber tube.
It's like resuscitation.
And because this was so long ago, there was no CPR.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was baby steps of CPR. It's not as fleshed out as it is now.
I know this is weird to jump in with, but there's an episode of Quantum Leap, which I love, where he jumps into someone in an era that CPR doesn't exist. And he saves someone's life with it, but they try and drag him off the person at first because they think he's assaulting them.
Wow.
And he's like, I'm trying to save him, like, leave me the fuck alone. I remember watching that
because he puts his mouth to the person and he's like
pounding on their chest. And I remember seeing that when I was a kid and being like, wait, when did CPR, when was that invented? My parents were like, pretty recent, like in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
I was like, oh shit, I thought that had been around forever.
Yeah.
So, gotcha.
So, his experiments were successful on dogs, creepily enough. Sort of. So, the first 3 dogs that were revived showed little signs of actual life afterwards. Lazarus, too, was in a coma for 8 hours and 13 minutes before they fully died again. He tried to speed up recovery using glucose, like a glucose solution, but a clot complicated the experiments of 1 and 2. Lazarus 4 came back blind and suffered brain damage.
This is horrible.
Though Cornish reported that the dog recovered to near full health in the following months. So at first, this dog couldn't stand on their own, but eventually did learn to crawl, bark, and sit up on its haunches, and would start to so many articles were like, it ate a pound of meat every day because it just got its appetite back and was just becoming somewhat normal.
They just wanted it to sound like human flesh in some ways to make it creepier.
Yeah, zombie dog. Lazarus 5 was similar to that of 4, but recovered in a much shorter time. So this dog recovered in 4 days instead of 13 days. That being said, these are all reports from Dr. Cornish himself.
Unreliable narrator.
Right, not confirmed by anyone else. But there really isn't any reports or anything of his experiments going
literally anywhere else.
Yeah. So he claimed his experiments were a success. And technically he did bring these dogs back to life, but in what capacity are they? You know what I mean? Like, this dog suffered brain damage.
Yeah, it's like he's beginning to tap into the idea of like resuscitation in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
But it's horrific, man. It's like the most awful version of the movie Flatliners you could ever think of.
Never seen it.
Flatliners is basically a movie with a premise of people kill each other and then bring them back from death.
Why?
It's like they would medically induce them to die because of what the experience you go through is like nothing like anyone ever feels. So they like do it in a very heavily, I've never watched it, but you do it in
No. I mean, the word euphoria is like euphoric when the feeling when you die.
I don't know what the feeling is because I've never seen it. So I don't know if it's euphoric or if it just gets you like raging hard. I don't know.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is like they all gather around. They're all medical professionals in some way, shape, or form. And they know what they're doing so they can medically like kill you and then bring you back in some way, which I think is paddles. But I've never fucking watched the movie. I don't know. But that's the premise of it. But in this case, he's just like, well, I'm going to kill them to see if I can bring them back.
Yeah, it's just really creepy, really messed up that you would actually do that on purpose.
You have to be just basically a certain level of crazy to do that. And clearly, by naming the dogs Lazarus, he thinks he's God and he's allowed to toy around with things
exactly.
like this.
When I saw that he named the dogs that, I was like, this dickhead thinks he's like almighty, powerful, whatever. Side note, I Googled Lazarus experiment while researching all this, and all it kept bringing up was that episode of Doctor Who in like season 3 called The Lazarus Experiment. It was really annoying because I was just like, I can't find anything on this shit. What the hell? I just keep coming up with Doctor Who references. This is what I'm going to do. My episode's going to be about Doctor Who. You know what I mean?
So it'll be just like a bunch of other episodes you've done in the past.
Oh, shut up. I love Doctor Who. It was great. Doesn't matter. An article was published in what is now defunct Modern Mechanics magazine in July of 1934, and it was even brought up in the New York Times briefly. They touched on Lazarus 4 because it was like the first successful-ish one. There are pieces of some records of the experiments left, just covering different days of the process. Apparently, it would take over 2 weeks, because you have the experiment days and then you have the recovery days.
Right.
So since like Lazarus 4 took 13 days, you know what I mean? So, all right. Cornish was fired from the university when people found out that he was deliberately killing dogs for his experiments. After that, he kind of kept his tests to within his home using pigs instead of dogs.
Still not okay.
Right. But he was saying like pigs don't have as many friends as dogs do. Because
I know a lot of people with pigs as friends. That's all I'm saying.
Though some say he did continue to use dogs as, parts of his experiments when he was doing it at his parents' house. Pure conjecture, of course. There's not any evidence that he continued to do these things. He, of course, went from testing dogs to wanting to test on humans. In this similar way, not those dead bodies he was testing on before. So in 1947, he announces that he was ready to experiment on a human subject.
He announces this? Yeah. What the fuck?
So from an article that I read, there's a movie that was created titled Life Returns and actually starred Cornish playing himself, as well as one of the Lazarus dogs too, which is weird. It is about a doctor that tries to resurrect his son's dead dog. And at the end of the movie, apparently there's even actual footage of his experiments. So, yeah, it's messed up.
That's really fucked up.
He hoped to win a Nobel Prize with that movie, but it was not a good movie. So, but you know what is a good movie? Is Frankenweenie. If you guys
wow.
If you guys want a good movie, that's a good movie.
I've never seen it.
You've never... What? It's so cute. You should watch it. It's really good.
Okay.
I just think it's really cute. I just love all his movies, so they're really good.
I'll be.
But if you want, you can find the movie. You can find Life Returns and watch it. And if you're not a squeamish person, or you're morbidly,
Sean Connery.
or you're morbidly curious, footage of the actual experiments start at around 48 minutes and 25 seconds. There was a death row inmate in San Quentin named Thomas McMonagall, not to be confused with McGonagall. He actually went out of his way to contact Cornish. He offered up his body for science post-execution. Of course, this idea was put down by California state in order to avoid the double jeopardy clause.
Because if he comes back to life,
yes,
he's free to go.
Yep. And he murdered a 14-year-old girl. So
yeah, you want that dude to stay dead because sometimes dead's better. And for that dude, oh yeah, dead's a whole lot better.
Yeah, if it did work, he'd be brought back to life. He'd have to go free because you can't charge him twice.
Can you fucking imagine someone publicly saying they're going to do this and like the state having to step in and be like, like no, because if you bring a human back from the dead, it can't be this one. I can't believe an official capacity letter or like statement had to be made of like, this person can't be brought back from the dead based on our current laws. Like that's fucking nuts.
Yeah. McMonagall did end up getting executed on February 20th, 1948. So he was just straight up killed. Wasn't brought back to life. California was like, nah, dog, you're good. Cornish petitioned the governors of 3 states, Colorado, Arizona, and Nevada, to furnish him with the bodies of criminals after they were pronounced dead. They were obviously rejected for obvious reasons. According to some other articles, there were a number of others that offered their bodies, I guess. A man from Kansas offered himself up saying that he thought that $300,000 was a fair price to pay for them to experiment on his body. So if they wanted to use him, pay him $300,000. But they're going to kill you. You know what I mean?
Does he get to use that during life or do they pay that out to his estate? How's that going to work?
Cornish never took any of these people up on their offers because who knows why. Maybe he was too scared to because of all the legal repercussions. But in the 1950s, Cornish went from resurrection researcher to that's such a fucking cool name. Okay, resurrection researcher sounds like something out of a video game. But he went from doing that to develop a toothpaste. So he went from doing that, developed a toothpaste. He created
Please don't tell me it's Aquafresh because I love Aquafresh.
He created a product called Dr. Cornish's tooth powder with vitamin D and fluoride. I wouldn't buy it. I'm all about that, what do I use? Sensodyne. That's my jam.
Yeah, she clearly loves it. Doesn't even know the name of it.
It's because I don't look at the tube. Cornish passed away March 6, 1963, with no one to resurrect him.
Bummer.
Yeah,
that's... He's only like, 62?
He was born in 1903. So if he died in 1963, that makes him 59.
Gotcha.
Right?
You figured that out so quick. Good work.
Yeah, thanks. But yeah, that is the story of the Lazarus Project. I don't know if anybody's tried to do this still.
God, I hope not. That's awful.
I mean, there's CPR now, you know, people are brought back to life technically. I mean, if you drown and technically like have no brain function for a few minutes, people still bring you back.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing too, is like when it comes to the drowning and the resuscitation and things like that, it's like you're simulating their life functions while you're trying to like get their life functions back on. You know, that's like the whole idea with defibrillators or like breathing into someone's mouth. You're basically trying to get them to barf up the water that's in their lungs.
Right.
But it's like the idea of like, okay, now they're officially dead. Like you have to pronounce like time of death. And then you're like, now let's start working on them. Like that's just crazy to me. And the fact that he started with like dead corpses that have been, okay, all corpses are dead, but the fact that he started with corpses that have been dead for a long while, and then he was like, well, maybe they have to be fresh, is so fucked up.
What he was doing wrong was he didn't raise it up during a storm to get electrocuted by shots of lightning.
Which shockingly would have simulated a heartbeat a little bit, but it also would have burned the fuck out of the body. So. Yeah, that one was really morbid, really, really sad, and really creepy, and I think it's kind of right up our alley, so good work.
It's a little bit scary-ish.
Yeah, a little bit gross-ish too, but Good stuff.
My life is a little bit gross-ish.
Gross-ish. But yeah, so we are out of topics for this episode. That was super fun. If any of you have a story that you would like to share with us, whether it's paranormal, supernatural, spiritual, creepy, coincidental, true crime, feel free to do so. Reach out to us at storytime@scaryish.com. That's our email address. Or go to our website, scaryish.com, and click on Contact Us. You can also hit us up on any of our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/scarishpodcast. Twitter is @scarishpod, and Instagram is @scarishpodcast. Robin, for folks who would like to donate to us, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/scarishpodcast. So those are monthly donations, a whole bunch of different tiers. At the base tier, which is $1 a do, you get ad-free episodes. Can't go wrong with ad-free. And there's a bunch of other tiers you can check out. There's physical merch tiers. You can also go to coffee, ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast. Those are one-time donations if you're not into the whole monthly subscription type thing. And all your donations go to helping us upgrade our studio setup, kind of keep us going, give us that inspiration. Motivation is the right word. But yeah, you guys keep us going.
Indeed. So thank you so much to everyone who supports us. Sorry about the late episode. We love all of you. We hope you enjoyed this one. And I think that's just about everything for episode 175. So Robin, go ahead and sign us out.
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you folks next time.
Bye-bye.